and powered by demerarawaves.com.
Good day with your major newscast. I'm Jessica Daw. First with the highlights. The feasibility study for the construction of the bridge over the Currentine River to be completed shortly. The Guyana Public Service Union case in which it is asking the High Court to squash government COVID vaccination measures deferred to January 20th, 2022. The government is open to purchasing the viral COVID treatment pill when it becomes available and approved. The Working People's Alliance has joined other civil groups and political parties to condemn the approach and amendments to the Representation of the People Act being proposed by the governing People's Progressive Party. Police say they have destroyed more than $2 billion in suspected marijuana plants on a 40 acres farm in the Upper Berbice River, Region 10. In the region, the Prime Minister of Jamaica, Andrew Holness, says the government is preparing for an unexpected fourth wave of the COVID-19 pandemic in early January. And internationally, German MPs vote in favor of a new set of measures, including access to public transport only for people who have been vaccinated or tested amidst new COVID surge. The details of these stories and more in just a moment.
Not seeing returns on your dollar? Then advertise with News Talk Radio Guyana 103.1 FM and see results. We give you competitive rates, wide coverage, appealing programs, streaming online worldwide on dem waves, and we give you value for your money. You'll see returns when you advertise with us. Call our helpful staff today on 223-1056 or 223-1041 for those competitive rates. 103.1 FM, accurate information blended with great music.
Now for the news in detail. The feasibility study for the construction of the bridge over the Currentine River will be completed shortly. Star News reports that head of the Bridges Department at Surinam's Ministry of Public Works, Farazia Atawala, says that a tender will be issued next month to allow engineering firms to submit designs for the bridge. The disclosure was made after an orientation visit to Guyana earlier this week. A delegation consisting of representatives of the Ministry of Public Works, OW, a consultancy company, and contractors was in Guyana for talks about the construction of the bridge over the Currentine River. Guyana and Nickerie were visited to see the places where the bridge will be built. The engineering firms were given the opportunity to become familiar with the sites and ask questions that will help them to design the bridge. The Suriname government says the more than 5-kilometer journey will include a connection to Long Island in the Currentine River. Both countries hope to start construction of the bridge by next year end. The Guyana Public Service Union GPSU case in which it is asking the High Court to squash government's COVID vaccination measures deferred to January 20th, 2022. The respondent, the Attorney General, filed his response to the defense late. This prompted the attorney for the GPSU, Darren Wade, to request more time to respond. Time was granted by Chief Justice Roxanne George, and she then issued timelines for submission for the substantive matter. The court set January 20th, 2022 for oral arguments. The Guyana Teachers Union, Guyana Public Service Union, and their umbrella Guyana Trades Union Congress have asked the High Court to squash the government's vaccination policy that they say amounts to coercion to take the jab against the viral disease. Also named as applicants are GPSU Vice President Don Gardiner, GTU General Secretary Coretta MacDonald, and the GTU-C General Secretary Lincoln Lewis. The lone respondent is the Attorney General Anil Nandalal. The trade union organizations want the High Court to squash the COVID-19 emergency measures number 20, notice dated the 29th day of July 2021 and published in the extraordinary publication of the official gazette dated the 29th day of July 2021. Additionally, they're asking that the state bear the cost of a COVID-19 testing regime for employees of the state of Guyana until the determination of the fixed date application. The government is open to purchasing the viral COVID treatment pill when it becomes available and approved. Health Minister Dr. Frank Anthony, during his COVID-19 update on Thursday, said the approved drug will be important in Guyana to treat the viral disease.
It is something that we are looking at. As I've said before, we have reviewed the efficacy of the medication. It seemed to be working quite well, and therefore, as soon as it's made available and it's licensed, then that's something that we'll want to look at. And it's certainly a medication that we'll want to add to the meds that we already have been using to treat COVID-19.
Manufacturer of one such pill, Pfizer, has signed an agreement with the World Health Organization Patent Department to allow other companies around the world to be licensed to produce the pill. The arrangement will allow for more access to the pills easily and cheaper for the treatment of COVID-19. The pill is said to be more than 90% effective in early trials, which was halted to begin production because of its effectiveness. Opposition leader Joseph Harmon is rejecting the system being used to select a new chief election office for the Guyana Election Commission, GECOM, the amendments to the Representation of the People Act, and subdividing Region 4. Mr. Joseph Harmon wants an independent team to hire a new chief elections officer. He says decisions taken by the present commission with a casting vote by the chairman will not be accepted against the backdrop of the decisions by the commission during the 2020 elections.
Anytime it comes down to a vote in the commission and that casting vote is to be made by the chairman, I'm saying to you, come the chairman, I'm saying to you, Chairman of the Elections Commission, that the Guyanese people will have a difficulty accepting decisions in that manner. So please take note. It is not too late, and it is our intention to ensure that Guyanese people have a major say in this matter before the commission comes to any final decision on who they are going to pick. It's not too late.
Mr. Harmon says the proposed dividing of Region 4 will create an imbalance in favor of the People's Progressive Party.
It's atrocious, and this is just a tinkering with selected portions in what Guyanese will call a wishy-washy exercise. The amendments to the Representation of the People Act principally seeks to carve District 4 into 4 sub-districts. Secondly, it creates a process and system peculiar to District 4 for the tabulation ascertainment of votes cast, and declaration of results in the said district. The creation of sub-districts only for and in District 4, whilst leaving other districts untouched, particularly Districts 2, 3, 5, and 6, represents the creation of an unequal electoral process and system.
Mr. Harmon says that the opposition will recommend its changes to the draft amended Representation of the People Act. He says the government's draft fails to address the registration of voters.
The amendment fails to deal with the real issues of electoral fraud revealed during the recount of the 2020 elections. The legislation fails to deal with multiple voting, voter impersonation, the improper use of certificates of employment and oaths of identity, measures to prevent ballot boxes being counted and processed without statutory documents, the residency requirement, the creation of a new official list of electors. We are not going back into any elections with that bloated list, and that list must be cleansed by a house-to-house registration process.
The Liberty and Justice Party, a new and united Guyana party, and several groups have called for an independent system to select a new chief elections officer of GCOM. Government has set aside 6 weeks for consultations on the proposed amendment to the Representation of the People Act. The Working People's Alliance WPA has joined other civil groups and political parties to condemn the approach and amendments to the Representation of the People Act being proposed by the governing People's Progressive Party, PPP. In a statement Wednesday, the WPA said it views the draft proposals as part of a larger PPP plan to gain control of the electoral machinery through intimidation and misuse of its legislative majority to gain unfair advantage over other political contestants. The WPA says the party is outraged that the government would produce draft amendments without first engaging in meaningful consultations with the political opposition and related civil society organizations. The WPA urges the PPP to withdraw the proposals and, as a start, adopt a more inclusive approach with the widest consultations aimed at consensus rather than further confrontation. WPA says one cannot help drawing a relationship between the ongoing prosecution of a senior GCOM staff and the stiff penalties being proposed. The party says the purpose of electoral reform should not be settling scores with political opponents. That party also says the proposal to break up Region 4 into 4 sub-districts is thinly veiled effort for the PPP to benefit from a first-past-the-post system. It says the proposed draft failed to address the tension between the National Registration Act and the Representation of the People Act, campaign finance reform, GCOM's structure, and the makeup of Guyana's hybrid National Assembly. The Guyana Fire Service, GFS, is now solely responsible for fire hydrants in and around the capital city of Georgetown. The GFS says the authority and responsibility to inspect, control, maintain, and operate fire hydrants were given by President Irfan Ali. The directives by President Ali ended years of dispute among the Guyana Water Incorporated, the Fire Service, and City Hall as to which of the agency is responsible for maintaining fire hydrants across the city. The Fire Service began inspecting and assessing fire hydrants across the city and found that there are 356 fire hydrants. Of that number, 121 hydrants are fully functional but are in need of maintenance, and 235 are out of order. Of that 235 out of order, 182 hydrants require minor repairs and the 53 need to be replaced. The GFS is urging members of the public to do their part to ensure fire hydrants remain operable and accessible at all times. Police say they have destroyed 500,000 cannabis plants at a farm at Maria Henrietta Village, Upper Berbice River. The police say the plants ranging from 1 to 8 feet in height were destroyed, along with 2,000 pounds of dried cannabis, 100 pounds of cannabis seeds, and 4 nurseries, all to a value of $2 billion. The release by the Guyana Police Force GPF stated that ranks of Regional Division 10 conducted the eradication exercise on 40 acres of land at the said location. Police say when ranks arrived at the location, 2 males were seen attending to cannabis plants and upon seeing the police, fled into the vegetation and subsequently made good their escape in an engine boat. Ranks conducted further checks in the area and 4 nurseries and 6 camps suspected to be living quarters. During the search, several suspected emptied 12-gauge shotgun cartridges were found in one of the camps. The suspected cannabis plants and camps were then destroyed by way of fire. Police say the estimated street value for the cannabis plants and dried cannabis is pegged at $2 million. Now for the news in the region. Caribbean Airlines said the first of several Boeing MAX 737-8 planes, which have been purchased by the government, has arrived in Trinidad and Tobago. In a statement last night, the airline said the first aircraft arrived last night, November 17. The airline said the aircraft will be prepared for induction in the coming weeks, but added that more news about the first takeoff would be available in January 2022. In 2018, the airline announced plans to add 12 Boeing MAX 737-8s to its fleet. However, in May of that year, several countries had grounded the aircraft following an Ethiopian Airlines plane crash, which resulted in the death of all 157 people on board. A Boeing 737 MAX 8 plane was involved in a fatal Lion Air flight in which 189 passengers were killed. The company acknowledged that the 737 MAX display system software did not correctly meet the AOA angle of attack disagree alert requirements, which was an optional feature. The company said it has since issued a display system software update to implement the AOA disagree alert as a standard standalone feature. The company says moving forward, all MAX production aircraft will have an activated and operable AOA disagree alert and an optional angle of attack indicator. All customers with previously delivered MAX airplanes will have the ability to activate the AOA disagree alert. In November 2020, the FAA redescended an order halting commercial operations of 737-8s and 737-9s. The company accepted responsibility for Ethiopian Airways Flight 302 losing control shortly after takeoff from Addis Ababa Bole International Airport. The company has also cut the production rate for new 787s to deal with production flaws in the fuselage and near the nose. The FAA says it will decide later whether any changes are needed to 787s that airlines are already using. The Prime Minister of Jamaica, Andrew Holness, says the government is preparing for an expected fourth wave of the COVID-19 pandemic in early January. The Prime Minister was candid about what lies ahead in the ongoing pandemic as he addressed the House of Representatives on Tuesday. He says Jamaica is expecting and preparing for a fourth wave, and it is likely to come in early January, just after Christmas. Prime Minister Andrew Holness says whether or not the country experiences a fourth wave, the magnitude depends on the people. He told House representatives that the only substantiable way out of the pandemic is a personal responsibility by all citizens to follow the infection prevention and control protocols and take the vaccine. The number of persons in Jamaica who are fully vaccinated stood at 481,900, representing approximately 17.1% of the total eligible population. The number of persons who have received at least one dose was 633,831, representing roughly 23.2% of the population. And lastly, in the region, the government of Antigua and Barbuda has announced that secondary schools will be open for face-to-face learning for both vaccinated and unvaccinated students in January 2022. The Antigua newsroom has reported that the cabinet met with its acting chief medical officer, CMO, the director of education, and the director of pharmaceutical services before arriving at the decision. The meeting agreed that the global figures within all secondary schools indicate that herd immunity has been achieved, and more than 80% of secondary school student population is now vaccinated. The cabinet note states that in balancing the benefits against the risk, the government has agreed that face-to-face learning of all secondary school students, whether vaccinated or not, shall commence in the new school term in January 2022. It was also agreed that the ministry will conduct sessions with parents of unvaccinated students to inform them of the necessity to act now and not to delay in getting their children vaccinated. All students who attend classes are still not vaccinated come January 2022 will be subject to a COVID-19 test every 2 weeks. There will be no charges for these tests. And here now is your international news from the BBC.
Hello, I'm Justine Green with the BBC News. Germany's lower house of parliament has approved new coronavirus control measures as the rate of infection continues to rise steeply. Daily confirmed cases have surged to 65,000, by far the highest figure in Germany since the pandemic began. Some Conservative politicians have threatened to block the bill, which still has to be passed in Germany's upper house. From Berlin, here's Damien McGuinness.
After a ferocious debate, German MPs voted in favour of a new set of measures to fight the pandemic. These would include access to public transport or the workplace, only for people who have been vaccinated or tested. Already in many German regions, unvaccinated people can't use indoor leisure facilities such as cafes, bars, gyms or hairdressers. The aim is to encourage even more people to get the vaccine.
Hundreds of Iraqis who'd been attempting to migrate to the European Union from Belarus are on their way back to their home country. An Iraqi Airways flight to the cities of Erbil and Baghdad took off from Minsk airport on Thursday afternoon. Iraq's foreign ministry says more than 400 people were registered to be on board. Huggy Rahman, who's Kurdish, is one of them.
We're going back with some of my friends. The weather was really bad and it was very cold. The Belarusian police treated us badly and the Lithuanian police were fighting us in any way they could. I tried to cross into Lithuania twice.
The Belarusian government denies encouraging people to force their way into neighbouring countries. Polish officials say there were more than 500 attempts to cross the border on Wednesday. Turkey's currency, the lira, has dropped further in value in response to the central bank's decision to cut interest rates for the third month running. The bank cut its key rate to 15% under pressure from President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He's repeatedly called for lower borrowing costs despite rampant inflation and a declining currency. The United Arab Emirates has signed a deal with Israel to jointly develop unmanned anti-submarine warfare vessels. Emirati and Israeli state-owned weapons makers made the agreement on the last day of the Dubai Air Show. Mike Thompson reports.
In a joint statement, the UAE defence conglomerate Edge and Israel Aerospace Industries said the vessels would be used for both military and commercial purposes. These would include submarine detection, anti-submarine warfare and oil and gas exploration. The deal comes after the UAE and Israel established diplomatic ties last year under an initiative brokered by former US President Donald Trump. The UAE was among the first Arab states to normalise relations with Israel. Along with Bahrain, it held its first joint naval exercises with Israel last week.
You're listening to World News from the BBC. Pakistan has released a hardline Islamist leader after agreeing a deal to end weeks of deadly protests by his followers. A government spokesman said Saad Rizvi had been freed from a jail in Lahore a week after his name was removed from a terrorism watch list. The Tariq al-Labig leader was greeted at the group's headquarters by hundreds of jubilant supporters. Mr. Rizvi was detained in April, sparking nationwide protests by the TLP. The Kenyan authorities say 3 convicted militants have been recaptured days after escaping from a maximum security facility. On Wednesday, President Uhuru Kenyatta sacked the head of the prison service. From Nairobi, Fernando Omondi reports.
It's redeeming news for Kenya's security services from one of the most embarrassing and concerning episodes in recent times. Detectives shared the pictures of a barefoot, bearded, stained Mohammed Ali Abikar standing face down in handcuffs next to Musharraf Abdallah Akhulunga and Joseph Juma Odhiambo. All 3 had been convicted of terror-related charges, with Mohammed serving 41 years for planning and executing the second deadliest terror attack on Kenyan soil, in which nearly 150 people were killed 6 years ago.
The government of Djibouti says the year-long war in neighbouring Ethiopia has had a drastic impact on its economy. Most of Ethiopia's goods pass through the port of Djibouti. The country's finance minister, Ilyas Musa Dawala, told the BBC that due to the conflict, trade had reduced to about 20% of its previous level. A Hong Kong clothing chain that supports the territory's pro-democracy movement says it's closing its stores because of harassment. The company, called Cheeky Duck, said its suppliers have been investigated and it's struggled to renew the leases for some of its shops. Staff members have received malicious calls. The company makes clothes and accessories that have images and slogans linked to the democracy movement. BBC News.
And that was your international news. Here now is a recap of the highlights. The feasibility study for the construction of the bridge over the Quarantine River to be completed shortly. The Guyana Public Service Union case, in which it is asking the High Court to quash government COVID vaccination measures, deferred to January 20th, 2022. The government is open to purchasing the viral COVID treatment pill when it becomes available and approved. The Working People's Alliance has joined other civil groups and political parties to condemn the approach and amendments to the Representation of the People Act being proposed by the governing People's Progressive Party. Police say they have destroyed more than $2 billion in suspected marijuana plants on a 40 acres farm in the Upper Berbice River Region 10. In the region, the Prime Minister of Jamaica, Andrew Holness, says the government is preparing for an expected fourth wave of the COVID-19 pandemic in early January. And internationally, German MPs vote in favor of a new set of measures, including access to public transport only for people who have been vaccinated or tested amidst new COVID surge. And that was your major newscast for today. I'm Jessica Daw.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.